One evening, I was coming home from work and I stopped at a pharmacy to pick something up. As I was walking out of the building, some guy came up to me saying he needed a ride somewhere. Now, normally I would have just brushed him off, but for some reason I was feeling exceptionally generous that day. The guy looked like he was down on his luck, in some trouble, and just needed a quick hand to get back on his feet. After all, I would want someone to do the same for me. Plus, the area we were in was considered pretty safe, so I let him in my car. The first red flag was the guy would not stop talking. He had this nervous, anxious look in his eye, like something clearly was on his mind. I myself am not much of a talker, so his rapid speaking became glaringly obvious as the car started moving. The second red flag was that the guy was trying way too hard to get my trust. He talked about how he goes to church every Sunday and he handed me a card for the church. He also demanded that we exchange numbers and said that I was free to call him the next day. But the final red flag came a bit later. The guy's story is that he needed a ride to his car, which had broken down on a street that he told me. As I was driving, I realized this was a little weird. Why do you need a ride to a broken down car? But as we kept moving, he said his car was actually on a different street and then another street. He changed the location of where his car was 3 times, saying he forgot where it was. At this point, my heart sank and I started to panic. I had to let this guy out of my car as fast as possible. It was already pretty late and we were surrounded by dark neighborhoods. I didn't know if the guy had a knife or a weapon on him, and I realized that his directions had been guiding me closer and closer to a much sketchier part of town. Next, the guy pulled out his phone and muttered something inaudible to whoever was on the other line. Then he said to me in a very loud and demanding tone, "We gotta pull over behind this Walmart, that's where the car is." His directions changed multiple times before leading me to the back of a Walmart in the middle of the night. I was very sketched out about the whole thing. But luckily, I saw my chance. We were approaching Walmart from the side, so the entrance to the back and the front are really close to each other. We went up to the back entrance and he screamed, "Right here, man, right here." But I kept going a little bit forward to the front entrance. I had to wait a few seconds for some cars to pass, and my heart was pounding as I was half expecting him to pull out a knife or a gun. The cars passed, and I drove up to the brightly lit Walmart front entrance with plenty of people walking about. The guy just opened the door and got out of the car without another word. I certainly feel like he was trying to set me up for a carjacking, or maybe a robbery. I used to hitchhike when I was younger. This was back in the 90s, and I would hitchhike many places. I did it all over the country, and it was a cheap way to travel. Looking back, it was also a pretty dangerous way to travel, and I can't believe that I even did it as much as I did. Well, I'm going to tell you the story of what made me stop hitchhiking. I was going to go to California to visit some friends. I had already made it more than halfway there, but still had a ways to go. Somebody had just given me a ride to a city that I don't even remember exactly where it was, but I spent a couple of hours there and then was going to try to catch another ride. I stood near a major highway, but next to a road leading to it. Then I waited for somebody to stop. Eventually, this white van pulled over. The man driving told me that he could drive me. I told him where I was going, and he actually said that he was also going to California. I felt extremely lucky at that point. So I got inside of his van, and he told me that I could sit in the back. The man had long hair, and I remember a mustache. It was great to get a ride from him, because there was lots of space in the back of his van. After he started driving, we talked briefly, but not much. Soon, though, I got tired. I had been up since very early in the morning, and eventually I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I've always been a pretty deep sleeper. Anyways, the next thing I knew, I woke up and the van was stopped. I sat up and looked around. It was still nighttime. The man was no longer driving and wasn't inside at all. I seemed to be the only person in the van. I looked out of the windows of the van to see where we were. It was parked in the driveway of a random house. But when I looked to the house, standing at the front door was the man who had been driving. I saw him talking to someone. Then the front door opened and several men exited the house. They all started walking in my direction. I just had a terrible feeling about it. I quietly went for the side door. I opened it up and I got out. Then I quickly ran down to the end of the driveway and into the next yard. I went down the street until I got to a random nearby house that seemed far enough away. I walked up and knocked on the door. I'm not even sure what time it was, but I got very lucky when the door opened up. When the person opened the door, I asked them to call the police, and thankfully they did. I explained to them what was going on, and I waited there on their front step. I did not see the men coming after me or anything. However, I did see the white van driving off down the road just a minute later. When the cops got there, everybody was gone. I got a ride to a nearby bus stop, and then used public transportation for the rest of my trip. The one time someone tried to rob me happened on a gray afternoon somewhere between towns in Ontario. I was hitchhiking, thumb out and my head down against the cold, when a pickup slowed and pulled over. The driver rolled down his window. I asked where he was headed. He shrugged and said something like, "Where are you going?" like he didn't want to be pinned down. I climbed in anyway. At first, it felt normal enough. We eased onto the highway and the truck ate up the miles. I tried the usual small talk, job, weather, and how far I'd come. He answered in single words, nothing that invited more, no eye contact. He drove with his left hand on the wheel, keeping his right hand near his pocket. I noticed that, but told myself not to read anything about it. People keep their hands in their pockets for weird reasons, and it was cold out, and he didn't have gloves. Then, while we were cruising, he pulled a pocket knife from his right pocket with his free hand. He reached over the middle barrier in the truck and had the blade pointed at me. "Give me your wallet," he said. I scooted to the far side of the seat, faced him square with my back against the passenger's door. He didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes on the road so he wouldn't crash. My first thought was disbelief. My second thought was to disarm him and take the knife. It was actually pretty easy as he wasn't even looking at me or glancing over. I reached, grabbed his wrist with both hands, and pulled. It was a quick, clean motion. The knife came free before he could tense. I had the blade in my right hand now, pointed back at him, and I could do damage near his waist where he couldn't grab it easily. And I still had his wrist in my left hand. "Pull over," I said. He did, and then yelled at me to get out of the car, like he was the one in charge. He dropped me off and then pulled away, continuing down the highway. I had taken the knife with me, and I slipped it into my pocket and continued walking with my thumb out, waiting for my next ride. That knife was the first I ever carried, as I kept it as my personal knife. I decided I should carry it now because the world had just reminded me that strangers can decide to pull danger out of a pocket like it's nothing. I never had to use it again for anything other than to open a can or something, thankfully, but I now have it ready if anything dangerous happens to me again while I'm hitchhiking. One time, I was driving down a road late at night. It was a quiet road, with no other cars in sight, and I was on my way home. I remember that I randomly saw this woman standing on the side of the road up ahead. It wasn't like in front of a driveway or anything, and she seemed very much out of place. As I approached, I slowed down because she was standing within just a few feet of the lane that I was driving in. When I got closer though, she actually started to walk out into the street and waved at me. It was not a frantic wave, but she clearly wanted me to stop. So I slowed down and then came to a stop just in front of her. She walked around to my driver's window and I rolled it down. I asked the woman if she was okay, and she said that she really needed a ride. I then asked her what she was doing out here at this hour, but she kind of blew off my question. Instead, she just said that she only needed a ride a few miles up and asked if I could take her. I said yes because I didn't really have a problem with it. That was the direction that I was headed, so I told her to get into my passenger side. After she did, I asked her where exactly she was going. The woman said just a few miles up the road again, but didn't give an exact destination. I just thought whatever and started driving. We mostly drove in silence for the next few miles. Then the woman told me to turn right at an upcoming road, so I did. I figured that she lived over there. It was an even quieter road than the previous one that we had been on. After driving that way, I was told to take a left at the next road. I did, and this road was now surrounded by woods on both sides. I was driving slowly down this very quiet road, and then randomly the woman told me to stop right there. I was very confused. There were no houses or buildings, it was just woods. She said that she would get out there and thanked me for the ride, but I asked her why she wanted me to stop there. She just said that's where she wanted to get out. I asked if there was a reason why she was getting out there, but she just opened up the door at that point. But before she left my car, She asked if I could come out and help her real quick. I asked with what, and she just told me to get out of the car. By now, I was thinking that this whole thing was really sketchy. I was regretting even giving her a ride in the first place. I told her to get out of my car. The woman then raised her voice and yelled at me to get out of the car now. I said no, and I hit the gas pedal and started driving. The woman then started literally screaming at me to stop the car over and over. I did not. I kept driving for at least 100 yards or so. Then I pulled over and I yelled at her to get out of my car. At that point, she finally did. She cursed at me several times before leaving the car and walking away. Then I quickly drove out of there. I'm pretty sure that the woman was setting me up to get robbed or something. I called the police after and reported everything. I'm glad that I didn't get out of the car where she wanted me to. Hopefully, nobody else fell for her tricks. One day, a couple of years ago, when I was 25 years old, I had a little time to kill before picking up my kids from school. It was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising some back roads in my small rural hometown listening to music. I passed this guy with his thumb out trying to catch a ride. He looked to be in either his late 30s or early 40s, and he was carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Being a female by myself, I decided to just keep driving. I passed the man and kept going, but as I drove, I had this internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick up the guy. I figured if I was in his shoes, I would want to be picked up. That, mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing things out of my comfort zone, led me to the conclusion that if he was still there when I came back around, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling over to pick him up, but I had a safety plan formed in case anything went wrong. As soon as he got in, I realized I had probably made a horrible mistake. Firstly, because he seemed like he was on some sort of a drug and smelled awful. And secondly, because this dude was looking at me in ways that make women uncomfortable. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke, and my hands were shaking so bad when I was grabbing one from my pack. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves, but I was internally freaking out and had gone through many of the what-if scenarios in my head already. The guy's name was Wayne, and he lived about 5 minutes from where I picked him up, so thankfully the drive didn't last that long. Meanwhile, he was telling me about how he lost his license due to DUIs, and how he was living in this house with an old man. He was also trying to talk me into hanging out at his house with him and coming over to drink with him the next day. When I finally got him to his destination, it was a little shack thing that was surrounded by all these junk cars and other trash. He got out and still tried to get me to come inside with him. I told him no, and I left. I was feeling really relieved once I was gone, and a little proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to a month later when I found out that somebody got murdered down that same road where I dropped Wayne off at. I saw Wayne's picture on Facebook saying that he was arrested for stabbing someone to death at the very house I dropped him off at. Graphic information about how he stabbed him in the lungs and the victim bled out in that little shack. Also, it turns out that the old man Wayne was saying he lived with didn't exist, and he was the only person living there. Very creepy stuff, and I'm sure I'll never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. I was 21 that summer, walking along a stretch of road near Gloucester, England, with my thumb out and a backpack slung over my shoulder. A music festival had just finished, and I was trying to get back home without spending the little money that I had left. Hitchhiking wasn't unusual back then, as many people did it. A white van slowed down and stopped a few yards ahead to pick me up. The driver leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. He was wearing blue overalls, and his face and hands were smeared with black grease, like he crawled out from under his car. His hair was thick and curly, dark as oil. I climbed in, and the whole van smelled like petrol. The dashboard was littered with old cigarette butts and greasy rags. He didn't look at me much, just stared at the road. Every so often he muttered something I couldn't catch, half sentences, broken words. I figured that he was talking to himself, but there was something off about him. I couldn't say what exactly, just a feeling that I had. After a while, he pulled into a petrol station. He told me that he needed to fill up, so I went out to stretch my legs. He went inside with a couple of empty cans, shouting to the woman behind the counter about buying extra petrol. I could hear his voice through the glass, and the woman shook her head and pointed to a sign about fuel limits. When he came out, he was shaking. He slammed the cans into the back of the van, his face twisted. He was talking to himself and called the cashier woman some nasty names. At some point through his mumbling, I heard him say, "She thinks she can tell me what to do? I ought to kill her." He kept on saying that, ranting as he drove. I sat there staring out the window, counting the road signs. Each time we passed a village, I thought about asking him to drop me off. Finally, when we hit a junction that pointed towards my home city, I said, "You can drop me off here, mate. My stop's just off this road." He didn't say anything, just pulled over. I thanked him, climbed out, and started walking before he could change his mind. It was the only time I caught a lift that's ever made me nervous. Years went on, and I completely forgot about my encounter with the man. I was in the kitchen when the news came on. 12 bodies found in Gloucester with the husband and wife arrested. Fred and Rose West. I remember freezing in place, staring at the screen. They showed his face, that same thick hair. I told myself it couldn't be the same man, so I later bought a book about the case. I read about what they did. I turned the page and saw a photo. Fred in overalls, face smeared with grease. It was him, the man I had hitched a ride with years earlier, no doubt about it. I thought about how close I'd been, driving in a van with a serial killer. As far as I know, he only killed women, so it appeared that I most likely never had anything to worry about. But it still irks me, especially how bad of a mood he was in the day that I rode with him. Years ago, right after I graduated from high school, I did a lot of couch surfing and was staying with my friend Mike for a while. His family lived about 30 miles north of the town I worked in, and his mother usually brought me down to town with her in the morning when she went to work. Mike and I would often stay late in town to hang out with friends, so we'd have to bum rides or hitchhike back if we wanted to sleep at the house. So one Friday, he and I stuck around town for too long and missed our ride back with his mom. We were young and brave tough guys, so we didn't think too much of hitchhiking back. We hung around the interstate exit with our thumbs out and scored a ride with two really cool Jamaican dudes. They drove us most of the way back up the highway and dropped us off at a town about 5 miles from where we were headed. Everything was going well, and we were happy we had made such great time getting this far. We walked up through the town, stopped for drinks, and headed out the north end to start hitchhiking again. We got picked up pretty quickly by a guy in his 40s who was very friendly. He told us he was headed right past the road we were headed for, and we couldn't believe our luck. I jumped in the front and Mike got in the back seat. As we came up on the turn near our drop-off point, the man suddenly put his hand on my leg. I quickly pushed his hand off my leg and basically stared him down. It was starting to get dark, but I told the man to let us off here on the road and we would walk the rest of the way. I just didn't want to be in the car with this guy anymore. The guy instead proceeded to reply, "Just relax, it's all cool, I'll drive you to where you're headed," and then he put his hand back on my leg. I was really angry at this guy, and I told him to pull over immediately as I reached for my pocket knife. Mike, from the back seat, grabbed the guy and put him in a headlock and started choking him out, telling him to pull over. The man let go of my leg and started yanking on Mike's arm, trying to get free. Both hands were off the wheel and the car was swerving all over the road. We were still going at least 40 miles per hour, and I was terrified we were going to crash. We were headed straight for this big tree on the side of the road, and the driver must have seen it because he slammed on the brakes at the last second. The car was moving slow enough to jump out, so I yelled "jump" to Mike, and then shoved the door open and we dove out onto the pavement. The driver realized I was getting away, and he hit the gas, making the door spring back and almost catch my feet. The back wheel missed me by less than a foot and the guy sped away, already back up to 40 miles an hour. Mike was rolling in the middle of the road, and I realized we had both made it out of the car. I grabbed Mike and we dragged ourselves off the road into the trees. The car was now doing a U-turn in the middle of the road about 100 yards away to come back towards us. We quickly flattened ourselves in mud and dirt as we hit as low as we could make ourselves. Both of us were banged up and bleeding from the pavement. The psycho drove past real slow to try to spot us, and he even turned around and came back again. Every time he got out of sight, we would jump up and run through the woods headed towards Mike's parents' house, which was still several miles away. Every time we heard a car coming, we would drop and hide. The car must have gone up and down the road a dozen times or more looking for us. It took nearly 2 more hours to make it the next couple of miles in the woods, in the dark. We finally got to the house, dirty, bloody, exhausted, and Mike's parents went nuts when they saw us. Mike's dad is a scary guy. He's huge, about 6'6", very strong, and has a bit of a temper as well. So naturally, instead of calling the police, He marched us down the highway and made us stand in the road as bait for the driver to come back while he hid in the woods. We stood there for another hour or so, but the guy didn't come back, which I have mixed feelings about. Mike's dad probably would have beaten the guy to death if he'd caught him, which is that guy's problem, but I was afraid the guy had a gun or something. After all, how was he planning on kidnapping two guys at the same time? Mike's mom made us report it to the police the next morning, but I never heard if they caught the guy. This experience is exactly why I don't hitchhike anymore, or pick up hitchhikers. I got the Jimi Hendrix figurine from a friend once. It was one of those small dashboard ones about the size of my hand. I'm not even a Hendrix fan. I couldn't name a single song of his. My friend just thought that it looked cool and gave it to me as a gift. I said thanks, stuck it on my dashboard, and didn't think much about it again. A few months later, I was driving home one night from a job site about 2 hours outside of town. It was close to midnight and the highway was completely empty. I had the radio off and was half zoning out when I saw a figure on the side of the road. It was a man walking, asking for a lift. He looked normal enough from what I could see. Normally, I wouldn't stop for anyone that late, but I think out of boredom I decided to pick him up. He jogged up to the car and spoke through the window. He said, "Thanks, man, I've been out here for hours." His voice was calm, polite even. I unlocked the door and he climbed in. We drove for a bit in silence. After a few minutes, he started talking. He said he was headed to the next town over to see a friend. He asked why I was driving so late, and I told him about the job site. He nodded a lot, but didn't say much. Then, out of nowhere, he pointed at the dashboard. "Hey," he said, "you like Hendrix?" I looked over at the figure. Yeah," I said. "Yeah, big fan." His face lit up. "Man, that's awesome," he said. He smiled and leaned back. "What's your favorite song?" My heart sank. I didn't know a single song. My mind went blank. I just said, "All of them." He laughed a little. Yeah, they're all good," he said. Then he went quiet for a bit, just staring out the window. The rest of the drive felt heavy. Every time he spoke, it made my skin crawl a little more. He asked weird questions like if I ever picked up hitchhikers before, if I lived alone, stuff like that. I kept my eyes on the road and prayed for the next town to show up on the horizon. After what felt like forever, he said, "Hey, you can let me out here." I slowed the car down and pulled it over to the shoulder. Before he got out, he looked at me and spoke. "To be honest, I was going to kill you," he continued. "But I couldn't do that to you," he said, nodding towards the dashboard. "Not to a Hendrix fan." He opened the door, stepped out, and shut it softly behind him. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I got home. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I turned on the local news while drinking coffee. There was a report about a man found dead on the same highway. The suspect was still at large. Crazy that a Hendrix figurine saved my life. Years ago, I was driving down the street one night. I was on my way home after working pretty late. By this time, most of the roads were quiet. I had left the highway and was on more local roads. However, I still had about 15 minutes of driving left before I would get back to my apartment. As I was driving down the road, there was mostly woods on both sides at this point. I remember that I was approaching a stop sign and saw somebody standing on the side of the road nearby. It was a man, and he had a small backpack with him. It appeared as though he was hitchhiking. This was really strange to see. I had never seen anybody hitchhiking in this area before. Plus, hitchhiking in general has not been very popular in a long time. It can be obviously pretty dangerous for everybody involved. When I came to a stop at the stop sign, the man looked right at me and waved as if to ask me to let him in. After briefly stopping, I accelerated through the quiet intersection and kept going. The man remained standing by the stop sign. I continued with my drive down the road. However, I got about a minute down the road, and after a gradual turn in the road, it became very straight. That's when I saw a bunch of brake lights up ahead. There appeared to be a traffic jam. Cars were stopped on the road for almost as far as I could see. I had no idea why. I thought maybe there was a crash or something. For this many cars to be backed up, people must have been waiting for a while though, because it was late at night. So I slowed down, and eventually I came to a complete stop behind the car in front of me. I really didn't know what exactly was going on. After stopping, I waited, and the traffic did not move at all. I remember that after a few minutes, I actually put my car into park. I rolled down both my windows to get a breeze of fresh air, because it was a nice cool night. I then went on my phone to look up what was going on, and maybe find an alternate route. This had been the only way that I had gone home from work, and I didn't know anything else. There weren't a ton of roads out in this area. I couldn't really find anything about it online at the moment though, and looking ahead, all that I could really see was just brake lights of other cars. So I continued to sit there, stopped, and I started looking for an alternate route. But suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard this noise to my right. As soon as I looked up, I saw somebody at my passenger side window. It was a man. He instantly climbed inside the window, and the next thing I knew, he was in my passenger seat. It happened so fast that I never had a chance to put the window up, and the guy was not that large, so he was able to make it in easily. After getting inside, I realized that it was the same man that I had seen hitchhiking just minutes earlier. After he got in my car, I asked him what he was doing. The guy said that he really needed a ride. I told him to get out of my car, and he said no. The guy claimed that he just wanted to go a couple of towns over. I told him again to leave my car. The man did not answer me. I didn't know what to do. To be honest, I wanted to get out of my car and run away, but I did not do that. I told the man that I was going to call the police, and the guy instantly snapped back, saying that he wouldn't let me do that. What exactly that meant, I did not know. The guy moved a little closer to me. I just pushed the horn at that point and did not take my hand off it. The man told me to stop, but I didn't. After a few seconds, some other people nearby started honking as well, probably because they were annoyed at me. The man reached over and tried grabbing my arm. I screamed for help, and my windows were open, so people had to have heard me. At that point, I could not believe it, but the man finally left. He opened up the passenger's door and leaped out. Then he ran off, disappearing into the woods that was next to the road. After that, someone actually got out of their car and were approaching me. I told them what happened and let them know that I was not honking just to be annoying. Eventually, traffic started moving. It probably took about 15 minutes. I did not see the guy at all. It turned out that the traffic jam was caused by a traffic light which had fallen over. I'm not sure if somebody crashed into it or what, but I'm glad that we got moving again. I still can't believe that the guy just jumped in my car like that. He must have seen the open window. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I was driving late at night with a friend on a little road in the middle of nowhere in the country. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. We were surrounded by woods and fields and the typical landscape when you're in the country. After a tight corner in the middle of a forest, we saw a lady on the side of the road a few feet in front of us. Immediately my friend, who was the driver, slowed down the car to see if she needed help. Personally, as we were approaching this person, I started to feel uncomfortable. I told my friend, and he said, "Nah, don't worry, I will just ask her if everything is okay." When we stopped the car, she looked at us and said that her car had a dead battery and she needed some help. She was in her 40s, maybe 50s, with long gray hair which looked really dirty. At this point, I was wondering how this situation was possible. We were talking with a totally random woman in the middle of the night in the middle of a forest. In hindsight, it seemed completely weird and dangerous, but at that moment, my friend was totally fine with the situation. It was a mix of his conscience and kindness, I think. As I was thinking about the situation, the woman continued to speak and said that her car was on a forest road just to the right of the main road. She showed us a tiny muddy path which was going deep into the woods. I looked at my friend and he looked at me, raised his shoulder and told the woman, "Okay, you can walk in front of the car. We will follow you." She smiled at us and said, "Thanks, you're really nice. I wasn't expecting people like you." She started to walk and we followed her slowly. As we were going deeper into the woods, we started to become more nervous. We weren't able to see the road behind us anymore. My friend started to realize that it was maybe a mistake. During this whole time, I was trying to explain to him how creepy this situation was. Finally, we arrived at the entrance of a clearing. That's when things started to become really creepy. First, there was no car, but an abandoned house with the roof completely destroyed and 2 caravans. It looked like a gypsy camp or some other type of travel group. Secondly, the woman started to run to the caravans and disappeared behind them. At this point, it was clear it was some kind of ambush or foul play. My friend immediately went back in reverse. As we were leaving as fast as the road was permitting it, the woman reappeared and ran to our car. She wasn't saying anything, just running. My friend accelerated in reverse, and we managed to make it back to the main road and leave very quickly. We immediately went to the police station a few dozen miles away. When we told them our story, they said we weren't the first. It appeared it was a caravan of weirdos who were living out there, trying to lure away drivers by asking for help. All the people in the area knew them, so they were aware of them, and it was a very remote road, and there weren't a lot of strangers passing by. I'm not sure what was going on in that clearing, but I hope the police shut it down, or the caravans moved on before they got any other out-of-towners to fall for their trick. This happened many years ago, in the late 1980s. I was much younger, and during a short period of time, I used to hitchhike. For months, I did it without any problems. I didn't have a whole lot of money during this time, and obviously I had no car. I moved around a lot, and would take buses quite often, but hitchhiking could be done where there were no buses. So I remember that one night, I was trying to go to a city about 20 minutes away. I knew pretty much where it was, and I was going to hitchhike to get there. So I stood on the side of a pretty busy road. It was nighttime, and I had finished working a temporary job just before. After standing on the side of the road for about 10 minutes, with most cars passing by, one finally stopped. After the car pulled over, I saw that a man was behind the wheel. He rolled down the passenger side window and asked me where I was going. I told him, and then he told me to hop into the car. So I got inside what was a pretty standard sedan for that time period. Then we left. Things started out normal. We made some brief chit-chat as we started driving. I don't remember what we talked about, but it was probably just basic stuff. Then things got quiet for a while. But I remember that after probably 10 to 15 minutes of driving, the man turned off the road that we were on. I was pretty sure that it was a straight shot to get to where I was going, so I didn't know why he would turn. After we drove on this random road for a while, I asked the guy where he was going. He turned at seemingly another back road and then said that he had to stop somewhere first. When I asked him where, he did not answer me. Things were starting to seem kind of strange at that point. The guy kept driving through back roads and soon went onto a dirt road. This one was even more quiet and seemingly in the middle of nowhere. I remember at that point, I asked again where we were going. The man just said, "You'll see." When he said that, I got a terrible feeling. I desperately wanted to get out of the car. So after going down this road for a while, he then started to turn. There was this really long and narrow driveway, it appeared. I could not even see a house or anything because of how narrow and long it was. When the man slowed down to make the turn into the driveway, he was starting to go down it, and I just opened the door. Luckily, I was able to, and after doing so, I just jumped out. I rolled into the grass next to the trees on the side of the drive, and I was fortunately not hurt. I heard and saw the car braking on the gravel driveway in front of me. I got onto my feet as quickly as possible and then took off running in the other direction. I went to the end of the driveway and back onto the road. Then I crossed the dirt road and went into the woods. It was dark over there with no streetlights, and the woods were pretty dense. I walked deep into them, and for a while I heard the car in the distance on the road, which was likely trying to look for me. I kept going through the woods for a long time. Eventually, I saw another road, or possibly it was the same one, I don't even know. But I went back onto a road and walked alongside of it for a long time. I was ready to dart back into the woods if the same car approached, but luckily I never saw it. After walking that road for a really long time, and eventually making it to another one, I noticed a gas station. It was thankfully open, and I went inside and asked where the nearest town was. I was told it was just about a mile up the road, and there was a motel. I ended up walking there and staying there for the night. I've never forgot that story, and I still remember it very well. I'm not sure what that man had planned, but I'm glad that I got away. When I was a teenager growing up in Southern California, it was not uncommon to hitchhike with friends. This was way before Uber or Lyft. and my friends and I actually always came out with cool stories from our experiences, as nothing bad had happened to me yet. We had some basic rules for hitchhiking being young girls, and the main ones was to never get into a van and to never get into a vehicle with more than 2 guys in it. I ended up in a horrible situation because I broke those rules. Southern California at the time had a ton of clubs you could get into while being under 18 years old, and bartenders could tell who was of drinking age by a band on your arm. It was not hard back then for my friends and I to slip off the under 18 bands and slip a drinking age one on. This was the 90s, so it wasn't really that strict. We were at one of these clubs, and my friends had decided that it was time to leave, but I had told my grandparents who I was staying with that I was spending the night at a friend's house. I wasn't ready to go, and I let my friends leave without me. When I finally decided to leave, I admit I had a little too much to drink and I probably was visibly intoxicated. We had pagers back in those days, so I had paged my friend who I was staying with that night that I was headed over to her place now. I started to walk the 3 or 4 miles to the apartment complex when a vehicle pulled up, asking if I needed a ride. The guy was kinda cute and I was very drunk, so I ignored the safety rules. It was a van full of college-aged guys, and it went against everything I knew, but I did it anyway. As soon as the van door closed, I knew I had made a huge mistake. The cute guy summoned me to sit on his lap in the passenger seat, to which I obliged. Then he started feeling me and the entire vibe changed. I knew I was in trouble. I played along and started talking about an after party with all my hot friends, some that were models, in hopes of putting their focus on something else. The driver summoned me to sit on his lap, to which I obliged again, knowing the longer I played along with them, the better. He would take his hands off the wheel, and then I would grab the steering wheel and he would grab me inappropriately. I felt that these 4 guys in the van were looking for an area to take me, and I knew what would happen if they found one. I then went into an elaborate story of how these after parties usually went. I told the guys of how drugs and alcohol were abundant, and how they were expecting me to bring cute guys to the party. I played these guys to the best of my ability because I knew that my well-being counted on it. Thankfully it worked, and they drove me to my friend's apartment complex since I told them that's where the party was. The apartment complex had a few other complexes around it with a park in the center. I had these guys pull up and park across the park, which was approximately 100 yards away from where I was actually going. I played out how much fun we were all going to have. As soon as the van door opened, I booked it and ran as fast as I could across the park, and could hear the guys yelling and coming after me. I was too afraid to look back, and I just kept running. I ran to the complex next to where I was actually going, where my friends had lived. I found a stairwell that had a few bikes chained to it, and I slid under the staircase. I could hear the guys yelling for me and getting close. I was afraid that my breathing was loud, and I was convinced that they might even hear my heart beating. It was so loud in my ears. I tucked up into the fetal position and closed my eyes so tight I thought I couldn't see them. I guess I thought if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. I tried my hardest to control my breathing and my heartbeat. I stayed under that staircase for a while, and they never found me, but not because of a lack of trying to find me. I was too scared to move. I felt like they were waiting and watching, so I stayed frozen. I finally had the courage to move after a while, and I carefully made my way to my friend's place where I was staying. I made it, and I was safe. I never hitched a ride from a stranger again. I know how lucky I was, and I know very well what could have happened, and I will be forever grateful that I did not become a statistic that night. I learned a very valuable lesson that night. This story takes place many years ago. I was a young man living out in the Northwest, and in those times, I was spending my summers working odd jobs to help pay for college. I would hitchhike occasionally, and it's not something that I did daily or anything like that, but from time to time, I would use it to get from one city to another. There was one night, though, that made me stop forever. I would say it was probably my 5th time or so hitchhiking. I needed to get to a city about 30 minutes away, and didn't have a car. I couldn't figure out if a bus was going to come through anytime soon, so I decided to stand near the side of the road and wait for a car. Several passed me by, until finally, there was a car that I saw slow down and then stop next to me. It was a gray car, and the driver already had all his windows down. He leaned his head over to the side of the passenger's window and said hi to me. He didn't seem too friendly, but he asked me where I was going. I told the man, and then he told me to hop in and motioned to the back seat. Based on the couple of words that we said to each other, the guy didn't seem very nice, but I had to make a split-second decision, and I elected to get inside the car. I got in the back, and immediately noticed that the man had a type of barrier set up between the front and back seats of the car so that when you were sitting in the back, you really couldn't see anything in the front. This made me regret my decision, but literally as soon as I was inside, the man began driving. I couldn't see him or anything, and now I had just hoped that he wasn't a total creep. His windows were all down in the car, and as we started driving at a decent speed, he rolled them up. When he did, I saw that they were all painted black, so I couldn't see out of them at all. Now I felt like I was in trouble. I tried to roll my window back down, but the button next to my seat didn't do anything. I called out to the man, telling him that I didn't want to ride anymore, but I didn't hear anything from him. I knocked on the barrier, which appeared to be very solid, and asked the man if he could hear me. I got no response, and the more we drove, the more worried I became. I was basically just sitting there in a box, not being able to see anything. I tried the door as well, but of course it was locked. I didn't know what more I could do other than just sit there and wonder where we were going. He drove for what felt like a really long time. I don't know exactly how long it actually was, but if I had to guess, it was probably about 30 minutes. At last, I felt the car slowing down, and then finally come to a stop. I heard the doors all unlock, and then heard the driver's door open. The man started walking away, and I decided to open up my door and look outside. I slowly opened it up. I saw outside that there was some sort of dirt road, but it appeared to almost be like a driveway of some sort. I looked around. It was very silent, other than the distant sound of crickets in the night. I wondered where I was and where the man had gone. I didn't hear any cars or see any lights to indicate buildings. As I looked outside further, there appeared to be just a woods and a dirt pavement that we were on. I stepped outside the car to see a grass field with a little shed in the distance, but it didn't really seem like anybody would be inside there. Then I suddenly heard footsteps coming from another direction behind the car. I took off and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running and had so much adrenaline that I probably ran for 10 minutes straight in the woods. I was terrified, but after I got too tired to keep running, I slowed down and didn't hear any noises. I had no idea where I was or how to get to safety. I kept on walking through the woods in the same direction, and eventually I made it to a road. This road was paved and not dirt. I figured I could follow it to get to some sort of town, or at least a gas station or something. The road was quiet, and I began walking on it for maybe 10 minutes before hearing a car in the distance. Then I saw the car start to come around the corner. I feared it was the same man and ran back into the woods until I noticed that it was actually a police car. I then ran out of the woods onto the street. The car saw me, and then I saw the flashing lights turn on. I then ran to the officer, who got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I told him what had happened, and he was able to drive me to a nearby town. I stayed there for the night, and then decided to just wait for a bus and not hitchhike again.
Okay, so about 20 years ago, when I was a naive 20-year-old, I was walking down the road in a not-so-great area. It was summertime, and I was dressed appropriately for the heat, in shorts and a tank top. I was very thin and was downright skinny back then, and got mistaken for a sex worker more times than I care to admit. Anyways, I was walking to pick up my son from daycare, and as I was going about my way, a truck full of men started to catcall and follow me. They turned around several times to yell at me out the window, and I was getting nervous about it. I was passing a gas station parking lot, and a man not much older than myself stopped in a nice car and asked if I would like a ride to avoid the catcalls. It was a nice gesture, and I didn't think too much about it, as I wanted to escape the van full of men catcalling me, but I really should have thought twice about it. So I got into the car with him, and he asked me where I was going. I told him it's about a mile straight down the road we were on. He started out going the wrong way and told me that he needed to turn around. He started to ask me about myself, so I told him the truth. I was escaping a domestic violence situation and was staying at a women's shelter nearby. I was telling him how closely my activities were monitored and that I was due to pick up my son at any minute. At some point, I noticed he took another wrong turn, but I didn't know the area at all, so when I pointed it out, he said he was taking a shortcut or something, and I guess I believed him since I didn't know the area. Then I got a whiff of something. I know now, years later after working as a nurse, that it was the smell of death, specifically a dead body beginning to decompose. I know this for sure now, but I did not know back then what the smell was. I turned around and looked in the back seat, looking for spoiled food or something. The car was absolutely spotless. I brought up the smell, and he brushed it off and changed the subject, but for some reason the smell just started getting stronger. I couldn't get over it, and brought it up again what the smell was. The man said that he didn't know, probably something he forgot to take out and had gone bad. I was baffled by this though, because there was not a crumb in that vehicle, and he kept it in pristine condition. But eventually he dropped me off safely to my destination. When I smelled my first dead body working as a nurse, it triggered my memory of the smell of that car ride years ago. I think back to how lucky I was to get out of that car alive, and the man who must have been a serial killer with a dead body in his trunk left me alone. I'm very sure that he was aware that not only would I be missed, but that I would also be missed quickly, and that probably deterred him from trying anything. My movements were tracked very specifically by the shelter I was staying at, and that was likely the only reason I made it back out of that car that day.
This happened just a few weeks ago. I was driving one morning, and I was surprised to see a hitchhiker. He was standing on the side of the road, not too far from my apartment. I remember noticing him because I really never see hitchhikers. Obviously, I did not stop and give him a ride, and I kept going. But the very next day, I found myself driving really late at night. I was in the same general area, but a different spot. I saw a hitchhiker again. I'm pretty sure that it was the same guy, although I can't confirm that. It's not like I got a great look and memorized what the man looked like the day before, but just based on the fact that I saw a hitchhiker 2 days in a row tells me that it was. So anyways, by this time the roads were extremely quiet. Hardly anyone else was out. I was less than 10 minutes from home. When I was approaching the hitchhiker guy, he started walking out into the road. I got a bad feeling, because it looked like he was going to try to make me stop. I slowed down and went into the oncoming traffic lane, which was obviously empty. When I did though, the man kept walking, and he too went into that lane. So now I had to basically completely stop. I went back to the right, and so did the guy. I stopped and then rolled down my window and said that I could not give him a ride. He started to say something, but then I turned my wheel to the left and started slowly driving. The man did not run out in front of my car again. He sort of walked in that direction, but I was able to safely get around him. I started to continue down the road, feeling like I possibly avoided a bad situation. I noticed headlights in my mirror, seemingly out of nowhere. There was another car on the road, and I saw the hitchhiker guy walking out into the road again. I noticed that this car was stopping for him, and I was just able to see him getting inside the car before they basically were out of my sight because I was driving far enough away. I guessed that whoever was behind me had decided to stop and give the guy a ride. So I kept going, but the car behind me soon caught up with me and started basically riding my tail. This was kind of strange. When I had to turn at an upcoming street, I did, but the car behind me did as well. After continuing to drive very close behind me, I wondered if they were following me. Well, it kept going for the rest of the drive home. They were in fact following me, and obviously I could not go back to my apartment. It was at that moment when I remembered to drive to the police, so I did exactly that. It took me almost 10 minutes to go to the nearest police station. The car behind me followed the entire way, right until the end. Then it went someplace else. I ended up reporting what happened. I have not seen the guy or been followed since. I'm hoping that I never see him again.